It's Monday, the 29th of April, and the time is 8:35 a.m. My name is Dingane Lutuli, and I'll be dictating File 1, Entry 10, a short story by Dlamini Lutuli, written in blue pen on an exam pad page. Text written almost entirely in English. Once upon a time, there was a young girl and a young boy who were inseparable friends. They were neighbors, and had been for a number of months. The boy's family had come to their little village by the winding river, his father having passed not long before. The girl's family, on the other hand, had lived here for many generations. The girl had spotted the boy one day, climbing the guava tree that stood in their backyard, and straining to reach one of its barely ripened fruit. She had snuck out of her home then, and swung a broom at a few to knock them off their branches. The two had scooped up the fallen fruit and snuck beyond her homestead, and thus a troublesome pair was formed. The children were incredibly mischievous, often labeled so by people in the village. They rarely listened to their elders, played outdoors past supper time, and went places they knew not to go, sometimes straying too far from home. The young boy was more reckless than the young girl. His mother was often too occupied to reprimand him for his misbehavior, where the girl's parents had started to mind her more closely. Often, when they went looking for trouble, the boy would dare the girl to more exciting games. "You cannot pluck just any flower from the neighbor's garden," he would say. "It must be the one closest to the house." "It isn't enough to throw a stone at their tool shed," he would insist. "It must go through the open window." The girl, not one to be outdone, would always rise to the challenge. One day, in the heat of summer, as the sun beat down on the valley, the young boy said that they should go down to the river. "The water is so clear and inviting," he said, "and it will surely cool us down." The young girl was wary of this. Her parents had always told her, ever since she was old enough to understand, that she was never to set foot in the river. None of the children in the village ever swam in it. They weren't even to fetch water from it, instead having to walk to a borehole in the next village over. When she said this to the boy, though, he was not discouraged. "All that means is we'll be the first to do it," he said, his fists held proudly at his waist. "You're not afraid of a little trouble, are you?" The girl, not one to be a spoilsport, went along with him. They waited until the sun was at its highest, when all in the village remained near their homes, seeking shelter indoors or under the shade of their eaves. They scuttled with hands and knees, close to the ground, around the backs of their homesteads, and out of view of any eyes at the windows. They scrambled down to the gravel road and followed along as it wrapped around the village, well below its proper, until they came upon the small bridge that crossed the river. "It isn't enough to just step in," said the young boy, as they inched their way down the bank. "You must go far enough that the water is at least up to your waist." The young girl told him to go first, as she kicked off her shoes, seeing as he was so bold. The young boy then shook off his shorts and stuck out his tongue at the young girl before leaping into the shallow stretch of river before them. She gasped as his feet made a splash, the water scattering and rushing back up to his knees. The boy turned to her and hopped a few times in place. "Your turn," he declared, and the girl hesitated. Though it was clear there was nothing wrong with the water, her parents' warnings resounded in her head. The boy began to grow impatient. "Come on," he urged. "Or are you just a big baby?" The girl set her teeth then and bunched up her skirt before stretching her leg out to step into the water. It was then that a voice came from a distance, high and shaky, but full of rage. "Out!" the voice cried, and the young girl and boy turned to see its owner approach from the other side of the river. It was an old man in creased pants and a worn shirt. the white of his hair and unkempt beard stark against his dark skin. He held Isakila in his right hand, which he used to balance himself as he hobbled down the bank. The young girl began to apologize, tried to get out a good excuse, but the old man continued over her words. "Out of my river!" he shouted, and he lifted up and waved Isakila as he got closer to them. His eyes were wide, one as white as milk, and both fixed on the children with fury. The boy scurried out of the river, gathering up his clothes before the pair ran away from the man and back up the gravel road. When they arrived back at the village proper, their parents and a number of their neighbors were waiting for them, having heard the yelling from far off. The young boy's mother snapped at him to come home, giving profuse apologies to the other adults before they disappeared into their flat house. The young girl's mother pulled her indoors by the arm as well, and gave her 3 lashes with uswazi for her disobedience. Her skin was red where the thin wood struck, and it stung long after she had stopped crying. Hours later, when she was allowed out of her room, she went to ask her father who the old man was. He told the young girl that he'd never known that man's name, only that he had always lived across the river from the village. The girl told him then that the man had shouted at them for being in his river, said she didn't know one person could own a whole river. Her father shrugged and said it was the same when he was her age. The old man's mother was still alive then, and she claimed the river as her own. She, too, would rant and rave if anyone stepped foot in it, even chased after and struck at those who still dared to. And so, the village decided it was easier and safer to simply stay away from it. When the girl's father asked her if she understood, she wasn't sure. But she knew what answer her father wanted, so she agreed. That night, when the air had long since cooled, and the crickets were well into their song, the young girl suddenly woke to a tapping at her window. She scrambled from her bed to see the young boy waving on the other side of the glass, beckoning her over. The girl listened to make sure that all in the house were asleep, then slowly angled her window open so she could carefully climb out. As they stole away in the dark, the girl following the boy, she asked him where they were going. "To the river," he said, like the answer was obvious. When she reminded him of the old man and his sakila, the boy insisted he would be fast asleep by now. The young girl was no longer enticed by the river. The wind blew cold now, and her father's story was fresh in her memory. Still, she went with the young boy back to the shallow stretch of river by the bridge, and stood by as he shed his clothes and dove into the water. "Come on," he called. "Up to your waist like we said." But the girl couldn't bring herself to move closer to the water. It looked different, now that she saw it in the night. Or rather, now that she couldn't see through it. When he realized she wasn't moving, the boy said, "You are just a big baby," before wading further into the river until the water was up to his shoulders. Again his words cut her, and she was about to dive in after him without thinking, when she saw something move in the water. Sudden, almost too sudden, but she had seen it. A shape of something, though she didn't know what, couldn't tell through the rippling surface and the black of night. She called out a warning to the boy, but he ignored her. "You won't be able to scare me," he huffed. "I'm much braver than you." The girl insisted she had seen something. Not a fish as one might think. There were no fish in this river, she knew that much, and what she had seen was much larger than a fish. The boy turned around, his face scrunched up like he was about to stick his tongue out at her. But his eyes suddenly widened. Then, his head disappeared beneath the surface of the water, with a small plop. The young girl gasped, what little fear she'd felt spreading through her, as cold as the air, freezing her to the spot. Then, The young boy broke the surface again, arms flailing as he gulped down breath, and he cried out to her for help. That sound, so filled with a terror she had never heard from him before, pushed her to act. She leapt forward and stumbled into the river, feet powering through the water as she reached out to grab the boy. She felt their fingers grasp each other's and lock together, and she pulled with all the strength in her little arms. She trudged through silt and sand against the weight of the water and against what held the boy at the other end, and pulled until she had dragged him into the shallows. With a shock, the resistance gave way, and the two of them collapsed onto the riverbank. Both the young boy and girl scrabbled back along the muddy earth, eyes wide and breaths heaving, and they stared at each other with a mix of horror and confusion. Before they could voice it, though, the girl saw something out of the corner of her eye, the shape she'd seen earlier, in far more clarity as it rose out of the water. By all accounts, it might be a child, if not for the great width of its body and the size of its limbs. By all accounts, it might be a man, if not for the thick fur that covered it, and the enormous square teeth that filled its mouth and took up most of its face. No, this thing, this creature, was not something the girl could comprehend, but for the hungry look in its eyes and its mocking cackle as it moved towards the bank. The young girl yelled for the boy to run, pushing up to her feet as panic took over her. She ran further up the bank, but the young boy was still soaked with water, and he slipped and fell on his side. The girl turned and started to run back to him, but the thing from the water moved much faster than her, on knuckles and toes as it sped towards the boy and bit down on his leg. He yelped as the thing's enormous jaw clamped onto him, his fingers grappling with uncaring mud as he was dragged back towards the water, and the girl could only stare in horror as his form disappeared beneath the surface. The boy thrashed violently in the water, but for mere seconds, before both he and the creature were deep and unseen in the river. The girl didn't scream, didn't make any sound, too stunned by how quickly it had all happened. It was almost by chance that she noticed the eyes that watched her from across the river. One of them white as milk. The old man, sitting cross-legged on the opposite bank, his sagila resting on his lap. The creature in this story is probably the most commonly spoken of supernatural being in Zulu folklore. So much so that it became a cultural reference even outside of other native South African cultures. Utigoloshe, a small, impish creature, humanoid but only in general shape. It's sometimes spoken of as a water spirit, like in this story, but usually it's created by a witch to act as their servant and carry out their bidding. It feels almost silly to realize that that's what that thing was. The one I ran into in the warehouse in Kraaifontein. These things are a scary story that we tell to children to make them behave and eat their veggies, or a funny joke to throw out when your things go missing. Oh, I'm sure Digoloshe took it. Even if some people talk about them like they're real, you don't actually expect them to be real. It's been a few days since the dark creature, this water spirit, attacked me in my apartment. I've spent most of that time lying in bed. Felt like I needed some time for the spinning in my head and the rushing of blood in my body to stop. It was only this morning when I realized that it might never stop. That this is just how I am now. In fact, on top of that, there's this clenching in my chest like something's wrapped around my sternum. I don't know how else to explain it. I haven't been able to sleep at night. I just stay up until morning, when I can pull all the curtains open so there's sunlight flooding the whole apartment. I don't know yet if that thing, if these creatures, only come out at night. From the stuff I've encountered in the box, there's always references to night and shadows and darkness, but it'd be foolish to take that as a hard and fast rule. At least if I sleep in the daytime, though, I'll be able to see anything that attacks me well enough to try and fight back. Now that I'm picking up with the project, though, I'm asleep around the time I would usually record these. I can't do them at night because that'd be inconsiderate to my roommate, who, unlike me, has a normal life and a job to get to. So, the alternative is doing them right after she's left for work and then heading straight to sleep. It's also better that she's not here when I'm not able to keep an eye out. That's the situation right now. I'm not sure what to do. I know what's expected of me, what my father did and his father before him, apparently in service to someone or something that wakes what is hidden. A service that I've now taken over, I guess, since that voice convinced me to perform the initiation ritual. I haven't heard it since, but I can't just sit around waiting for it. Waiting for answers to fall into my lap. I need to learn more. I need to understand. Call to the Dark. Created by Sandile Dlamini. Featuring Dingane. Voiced by Sandile Dlamini. To keep up with the show, visit @CallDarkPod on social media or email calldarkpod@gmail.com. You can also support the show on Ko-fi by going to ko-fi.com/calldarkpod.